Lights.
Yep.
Okay.
Okay. Good afternoon. Oh, can I start?
Yep.
Okay. Good afternoon, all. I am Ileana Corrales, and I am an investigator here at BEGA. I have been with the agency since 2015. I'm also joined today by Ralph Bradley and Ron Cook. Welcome to this year's BEGA. This year's Ethics Week BEGA investigation presentation. We are looking forward to providing you all with more insight into how BEGA investigators conduct ethics investigations. We hope that you find this information informative and share it with others that might be interested in BEGA's mission. Okay. First, next slide. If you all wanted to introduce yourselves real quick so that the attendees can see you.
Good afternoon. I'm Investigator Ron Cook with the Board of Ethics and the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability.
And good morning. My name is Ralph Bradley. I'm an investigator as well with the Board of Ethics and Government Accountability.
Next.
Yep. All right. So first, we're going to talk about BEGA's jurisdiction. We have jurisdiction over the entirety of the district government. That also includes elected officials that fall under the executive branch, as well as the legislative branches and their related employees. And also we cover those members that are part of independent boards and commissions. The only department we don't touch directly would be the judicial branch. So we're responsible for those entities when they're looking into any potential matters during the potential BEGA violations. Next slide, please. All right, what did we investigate? Actually, it's pretty short. We investigate any violations of DC Code of Conduct, and we address any allegations of ethics violations. We'll get into a little more detail as to examples of those, but our investigations are going to cover issues that are administrative in nature. So we're not going to deal with anything that's going to be criminal or directly dealing with employability, but we're definitely going to touch on those two issues with the Code of Conduct and the ethics violations. And next slide. Next, we'll have Ileana.
Okay, so this is because it should pop up. The diagram should pop up, Yvonne. You click it one more time. There you go. Okay, so how do I submit a BEGA complaint? We'll start off with this first because all of our investigations begin with the complaint. BEGA complaints can be submitted in person. You can come into our office. Of course, the pandemic has changed the way that we receive in-person complaints. So you can still come in. There's still investigators in the office Monday through Thursday, 9 to 5, and you will meet with an investigator to submit your complaint. Also, this applies to sworn complaints. Most people, when they want to submit a sworn complaint, they'll either hand deliver it or mail it in. Or if they just want to submit a hard copy complaint, they'll do that in person or via email or mail. We also have the web portal submission, and via email, we'll receive complaints, whether it's just a sentence or a paragraph. You are more than welcome to send it to bega@dc.gov or go to the BEGA website where you can submit a complaint through our link. I'll actually add the link to the chat because we didn't add it here. If you all want to take a look at the BEGA complaint form. And also another way that you can submit a complaint is through the hot phone. Now, again, the pandemic has definitely changed the way that we receive complaints. However, you can still call, I would call the main number first because then the direct calls get directed to an investigator or an attorney much quicker if you call the main number, which is 202-481-3411. The hot phone is still in use. And the phone number is 202-535-1002. Again, I'll add the link to the website complaint form as well to the chat box. Next. Okay, So this is the life cycle of a BEGA investigation. We start with intake, which is of course the complaint. Then after the complaint has been received, we do a legal review, and that involves the director, the general counsel, and the attorney advisors or advisor involved in the matter. The matter is then assigned to an investigative team. Here at BEGA, we work in twos. So we have an investigator and we work in teams. So we have an investigator and an attorney assigned to a team, and the matters get assigned to a team, which then leads to an investigation, which then concludes with a disposition of the matter. And we'll get into more details as to what this all means.
Okay, so at BEGA, we have 3 different case types. So our most common case type is preliminary. Most of the time we get complaints in, and after a discussion, as Ileana just showed you, the case goes from a complaint and is converted to a preliminary investigation. So we also have regulatory investigations, cases that focus on FDS and lobbyists. And then the least amount of cases that we receive are usually formal. So the formal cases are allegations received with a sworn complaint. So based on the ways that you're able to submit complaints to BEGA, the complaints are actually sworn out by the complainant. So it won't be an anonymous complaint. It's usually sworn out and signed by a complainant, which makes it formal. Other formal cases are referrals from other agencies, such as the Inspector General's office, MPD, DCHR, whatever agency decides they want to refer something to us that they think might be in our purview, is usually turned into a formal investigation. The formal investigations are a little different from preliminary because we have to come up with evidence and present it to the board within 14 days of that signed sworn complaint being submitted. Next slide.
Okay, so how does BEGA determine the need for an investigation? So how we said before in that diagram, we starts off with the director general counsel review, which then leads to which then a team receives the matter to investigate. The team determines, well, the team reviews the complaint, and they also interview the complainant if possible. Sometimes complainants want to remain anonymous, so we do not have capability to get in contact with them. So we just hope that there's enough information in the complaint to know who it is that they might be talking about or what agency they are complaining on. Or so we'll do that, and then we will discuss the relevant code of conduct violations and discuss the elements of the violations. BEGA, well, most often, I did want to add this, most often letters of complaints will not be expressed in a way that make the allegations contained with them easy to investigate, and often important details and particulars will be missing. At times, the complainant submits a list of allegations, including personnel issues, and we will move forward only with the unethical allegation. Ultimately, BEGA determines the scope of the investigation per the DC Code of Conduct, meaning that we will investigate matters within the complaint that allege any violations of the DC Code of Conduct. And we will also refer the matters that do not fall within our jurisdiction to the appropriate DC government agencies. Next. Oh, yeah. Okay, so planning the investigation. So this is our BEGA's roadmap of how we will conduct the investigations. Our plans are, tailored to the particulars of the case and ensure that we will cover all necessary points. In the plan, we will determine who we interview, determine what order we will follow for these interviews, and what topics we will cover with anybody that we will interview, whether it's a witness or a respondent. We also will determine if we need any records or any other documents, whether it be from DCHR or any other agency that might have information that we could find useful to our investigation. And we will also determine if there's any need for any outside assistance from other colleagues or other resources or outside resources, like the Office of the Inspector General, the Office of Attorney General, et cetera.
All righty, let's go ahead and dig a little deeper into interviewing. And just so you are aware, if you have any questions as we go throughout the presentation, of course, at the end, we'll have an opportunity to field questions. But if you have something that sparks your interest as we move through, you can just put your question in the Q&A portion, and we'll make sure we flag it and have an opportunity to answer it while the information is currently fresh. So remember, when you're doing interviews, your sole purpose is being a fact finder. And our job is to just collect the information, whether it's something that is exculpatory or something that is supportive of the violation. We just want to make sure we get the proper information that's going to reveal to us whether there was a violation that was committed or not. So if you keep that in mind about being a fact finder, that's the overarching principle. And again, it's important for us to maintain an open means of communication. That discussion, as I'd like to call it, even though it's considered an interview and we're gathering information, it's pretty much a discussion. It's an opportunity for us to ask questions, follow up on information that might have been presented. If we've had evidence that was already available to us and that information is available as well, then we just want to get an open dialogue going with the individual, whether they're a complainant, witness, or a respondent. Because in order to get that information that's necessary, we have to make sure that we're communicating clearly and accurately with the individuals and that we're soliciting clear and accurate information. So open communication is extremely important when we are engaged in these interviewing techniques. We abide by a non-confrontational approach. There's a significant difference between interviewing someone and interrogating. Interrogation is not the route that we're going because of the nature of our cases. Our cases are civil in nature, and we're looking for information to support or refute a violation. We're dealing with employees, we're dealing with senior members of government, we're dealing with the public when it comes to addressing complaints. So we don't want to create any environment where we're shutting down the ability to have that open communication that I mentioned before. So we approach things in a non-confrontational manner. We try to use the information that we've accumulated through the investigation to support it with factual basis. And we also want to make sure that we're being respectful and that we're being considerate of the individuals that we're interviewing. I think you all understand that you kind of give what you get. If you are respectful to the individuals you're talking to, you tend to get that same response. So we tend to have a non-confrontational approach. Now, about that respect issue, it's very important to develop rapport with the individuals. Sometimes we have individuals who will contact us and they're very upset, frustrated. They are not feeling that their needs are getting met. And it's important for us to hear out their concerns, get them to a point where they're able to communicate rationally. Sometimes we may understand their point of view. Others, they may be in a similar type of employment, so we have something in common, but we want to make sure we build rapport. And that's just getting an environment where we're able to engage the individual and have them more so be comfortable with us instead of vice versa. We want to make sure that they're in a position to provide as much information that they can. And remember, the initial rule here is we're fact finders, and the only way we're going to get the information we need during an interview is if we provide that conduit for someone to talk to us. And so building rapport is extremely important. Sometimes it's a comment about a sports team if they're wearing a sports jersey. Sometimes it's about an office they work in that we might have worked in at one time. We'll find some way to connect with the individual so that we can get to a bridge where we can begin to communicate with them and start to get the information that we need. So I mentioned previously, we have different types of interviews that we conduct. We definitely want to talk to the complainant and find out the source of the information. Why do they feel it's a violation? Give us the information and details from their perspective, because it was enough concern to them to communicate with us the need to file a complaint. So we talk to the complainants. They can be employees, they can be members of the public, they can be anyone. So when we're talking to our complainants during our interviews, again, we want to be open and respectful. We want to listen. allow them an opportunity to tell their story and ask those pointed and factual questions in order to pinpoint specific information that we understand is relevant to a potential violation. Sometimes they get a little long-winded because they're passionate about their complaint, but we want to listen. As I said, open communication is important. And if you have enough rapport built where they feel they can talk, let them talk, and you'll get a lot of information that you might need to address your potential violation. Witnesses, those are extremely important because they have been identified as someone who may have specific information that might be relevant to the violation that we're looking into. So this is going to be a little less of a tell me your story, but it may be a situation where we're going to ask more specific questions. Names, dates, details. Did you see this actually, or who did see this actually? We want to make sure we're getting direct evidence that supports a potential violation, and our witnesses are the ones that can provide that information to us more specifically. Witnesses are tend to have a feeling that they need to support and respond in a way that's going to be helpful to the investigation. Now, don't get me wrong, sometimes we get witnesses that are not really receptive and want to speak to us. That's when we go back to building rapport, let them know the importance and the need for the interview. And you need to your interpersonal skills to try and get that individual to communicate as openly as possible. Then, of course, we have our respondent. That's the individual who the allegations were made against. And this is an opportunity for that individual to provide their input. We don't go completely on what everyone has provided. We need to hear their input as well. It's extremely important to hear their point of view because they know the circumstances around the incidents that we're dealing with. And they may actually have a reasonable answer as to what took place. For instance, it was not an issue of me working on another job during my current work hours because I was on leave that day and I have leave to prove it. So although there might have been a behavior that someone was doing something on work hours that they should not have been doing in a private matter, if the individual can show that they have the proper documentation to support that they were not on duty that day and they were able to function in a private manner, then that's information we would possibly not get unless it was given to us by the respondent. We want to make sure we get their perspective, and it's important for them to have their input on this process as well. So when we talk about open-ended questions, we talk about just the 5 W's, you know, the who, what, where, whens, whys, and hows. Those questions are going to generate a conversational tone. It's going to generate an individual explaining what's happening instead of giving yes or no answers, which is more of a direct question. And when you get someone talking, you can tend to fill in the blanks, and they may answer questions that you have down the road just because they're in a mode where they want to communicate. So you definitely want to stick with the 5 W's, and don't forget the how, motivation, and the process in which things were done is extremely important for us to deal with. One thing we always learned is that people love to speak. So if you have an opportunity to get that old strategic silence, ask a question, wait for them to pose their answer. Sometimes they want to fill that void. So sometimes the best question is not to keep talking. It's to give the individual an opportunity to process the question and then provide an answer. And then go back to the ones that we typically want to ask, direct questions. Those are used to lock in particular statements. Those are the, were you working on this day? Generates yes and no answers. Did you see so-and-so drive the vehicle that was marked with the DC logo on it when they were taking their son to soccer practice? That's a yes or no question. So you want to ask those direct questions to lock in your information and to lock in the statements and to provide you that pure answer that's going to help determine whether we have a violation. So interviewing is definitely a trade practice, and the 3 of us, our agency counts on the 3 of us to do this quite often and frequently, and this is one of our biggest tools to get information. We'll go on to the next slide. All right, next we're going to talk about our research methods. And some of these may be familiar with you. We definitely, and since we're dealing in a job where we're dealing with employees and officials within DC government, we use PeopleSoft. It provides us a lot of information that we can gather, personal information about employment status, current position, time and attendance. It gives us an insight on the individual that's employed and gives us an idea of where they're located. contact information, some of the basics that allow us to get ourselves started with our investigation. We also get into some of the private matter accesses like Clear, LexisNexis, TLO. Those are all private query data systems that provide personal information. It could provide something like employment, last known residences, contacts with other individuals, phone numbers, emails. There's resources can provide us with means to contact people or locate them. And it's extremely helpful for us when we're unable to identify someone who may have left the government, and then we need to reply or count on our private methods to gather information. One of the resources people may not know that we deal with is emails. Any data systems that are run by the DC government, especially if it controls personal information, proprietary information, or public information that is governed by access, we have access to those systems, or at least the agency that has control of those systems. So if we need to communicate and find out if someone's talking about a particular instance, if we're dealing with a case with someone working on on-duty employment, well, if we do an email run for a particular period of time, and we articulate it between particular individuals, possibly the respondent and their outside business, we can run that email query and pull those emails that move between the individual and those other entities to determine if they had communication. And if so, we can get access to those informations and look through the body of the information to find out if the individual is dealing with, and say in essence of outside employment, if they're communicating and using our government email system to take care of personal business. We're able to identify that. And we go through Octo to provide that information. There are also other systems that we can have access through to the system owner, DMV, not just HR can provide us with information as well if we have a specific need for it, but we do count on those resources to generate more information for us to use to support our investigations. Of course, we've got our great ones here, the public information, good old Google, LinkedIn, any social media. Those are all fantastic resources for us to identify information related to our potential subjects. And also just agency information. We coordinate with other law enforcement agencies, regulatory agencies, just to seek their assistance if we're trying to find out information that is relevant to their particular needs. So that'll be it for the research. And next we'll have Ron go ahead and talk about dispositions. Next one.
Once we finish everything, once we do the intake process, the review of the case to determine whether or not it's going to be a complaint or a preliminary investigation. Once we do the investigative plan and set up the interviews, once we finish the interviews and finish all of the research, we get to the end of the case, and these are ways that we close the cases or either set them up to be referred to another agency. So the main tool that we've used since I've been here, the most common one is a negotiated disposition. So negotiated disposition is it's a document that we put together with facts that we discovered throughout the investigation, pointing out different violations of the code of conduct. So usually we present this to the respondent. The respondent has an opportunity to change some of the language that that they might not agree with. So we come to a conscious median. They usually sign it. It's kind of like a plea agreement. It's short. It's kind of like a plea agreement. So it's like an admission of guilt. They agree to a certain fine that's set by our director, and that usually gets posted. Once we finish with it, it actually gets posted on our website with just the respondent's first initial and last name. So next we have the notice of violation. The notice of violation is kind of like a trigger for individuals who, don't agree with the negotiated disposition or are being difficult. Usually a notice of violation will follow. We send in the notice of violation. They have maybe a couple of weeks to respond to that. If not, then, the notice of violation can trigger a full and adversarial hearing before the board We've only had that happen a handful of times since BEGA's been open, which means the negotiated disposition is working. So that's a good thing. We also have show cause hearings. So for individuals, again, who may be difficult and really don't want to sign or don't agree with the fact that they may have violated something, usually we'll do a show cause hearing, have them come in, they can present their side if they need it, if they want to bring an attorney or other individuals who may be able to add something to their case, they're able to come in. It's kind of like a closed hearing between the respondent, individuals from our offices, and witnesses if they're called. So we use show cause hearing. Next, we have informal admonitions. The informal admonitions are usually warnings for minor violations. So we issue those a lot. And public censures. Public censures are reprimanding of a public official for inappropriate conduct or voting behavior. Next slide. So next, I'm going to talk about a case that's real familiar in our office. It happened a little early on. I'm going to go through it so it kind of lets you know what we deal with and how the tables can turn in certain situations. And I'm just going to lay it out. And if you have questions about it once we finish, then we'll answer those questions. To answer one question that I see, are informal admonitions public? No, they're not. They are closed. The negotiated disposition, once they're posted, they are public. The informal admonitions are warnings usually put into the individual's HR file. Okay, so the case that we're looking at, I can remember back early on when we started, we received an anonymous complaint for allegations that an employee at an agency was misusing government property. The submission came through the BEGA mailbox. This was when before COVID, when we were receiving cases physically. So it was actually hand delivered and brought into the office, mail courier. The government property in question, once we read over the case and looked through everything, it was discovered to be Metropolitan Police Department parking placards. Now, if you're familiar with this area, you know, a lot of the police officers in their personal vehicles, you may see, or FBI and other agencies around, the U.S. Marshals, when they park around here to go to court and things of that nature, you see like a little piece of paper or laminated card in the front window. So those are parking placards. So in this instance, dealing with this case, the government property that was allegedly misused was MPD parking plaque. So who's involved? At the time, it was anonymous. So we know somebody submitted it. We didn't know who it was at the time, so it was considered anonymous. We had a respondent. One, after going through everything, we determined that it was one respondent. It was two respondents and multiple witnesses. Okay. So the case ended in a negotiated disposition with 2 terminations. So I'm just going to run through it real quick. So we got the case. We looked through it. We did some research, set up the interviews, talked to some witnesses. So we discovered that the anonymous complainant was actually a DC government employee. So that kind of added some light to the case. But once we discovered that this individual was a DC government employee, we decided to kind of turn the investigation backwards, not interview a lot of witnesses, and kind of go for the respondents first to see what type of merit was behind it. So we interviewed one respondent, and out of that interview, it was determined that the anonymous complainant and the respondent who was being, that the complaint was about, were actually married. Both of them were married. They actually worked at the same agency for a while. The anonymous complainant had just recently moved from the agency where they both worked to another agency. My apologies for that. We have a censor in our office. So he had just recently moved to another agency. And so the complaint was filed by the anonymous person on the respondent, interviewed the respondent. We found out that who the complainant was, where the complainant worked, a lot of information about the placard. We found out that the respondent one admitted to, yes, using the placard to park in this area when regular parking wasn't available. We also discovered that in an argument, as I stated before, the two were married, currently going through a separation. The two were married. Respondent one admitted to using the placard, but admitted that, well, gave us information that during a dispute, the respondent one had taken the parking placard from respondent number two, which was the anonymous complainant. So through interviews and through some other research, a lot of stuff turned around. We determined that the complaint it was anonymous, but it didn't end up being anonymous. And so once we did everything and conducted interviews and did some research, we found out that the anonymous complainant and the respondent were in a custody battle. The anonymous complainant submitted the complaint in attempt to have respondent number one terminated so that it would give them an edge up in the custody battle regarding the two children that they had. So that's just kind of example of things that, cases that we have that we, may come in as anonymous. Some of them come in and they're kind of crazy, but some anonymous complaints come in, and you find out stories like this, and it's kind of exciting once you get into it and you really start figuring out the truth about what's going on. Because, sometimes, and in this case, it ended in a negotiated disposition with respondent number one, but it also ended up, unfortunately, with both respondents being terminated from their agencies. However, after the disposition was posted and the information was listed, respondent number one was actually offered to get their position back once all of the details about, what had actually transpired and what was going on surfaced. So that's just an example of one of the cases that we have. We have multiple cases in that manner with different, aspects and different violations. So this is just an example. So I think that's it for the case discussion. We have questions. We open the questions if you want to ask any of us any questions. And thank you for attending our session.
Right, so if you wanted to ask any questions, go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll review them and go through them. Ralph, did you want to add anything else?
Well, while people are thinking about potential questions, just remember we handle a lot of cases just dealing with potential attributes with violations. We handle, improper gifts to employees, conflicts of interest, nepotism, hiring your employees that are related to you. We deal with a variety of things. While I'm speaking, I noticed we have a question in from, looks like Miss Sherry Tillman. It says, is there a time limitation to submit violations to your agency? Sherry, there's no time limitation to submit the violation. We do need to be cautious about a potential statute of limitations if it's been, 5 years prior. The ability to address current information that's not stale and speak to people that are relevant to find out there's a potential violation. We start running into difficulty if it's been around too long without activity or information. So there's no time limit. We do address that 5 years as like a statute of limitations, but we'll take the allegations at any point. The more clear and concise the information to support the violation can help lead to the most successful outcome for them. So
Right.
thank you.
And if you submit a violation that's within, it's outside of the 5 years, you'll still get a letter from us explaining, why this matter, why we cannot investigate this matter. So whether you submit a complaint that moves forward or not, you, as a complainant, you will still receive a letter from us explaining if the matter has been dismissed or it was investigated and closed. We don't disclose too much of what went into the investigation, but we will let you know that that is if you made yourself, if you gave us a contact information. So for people that do not remain anonymous, we usually can send you a letter.
Ileana,
Yes.
another. It's just the question is roughly how many formal complaints do we investigate in a particular year?
Formal complaints?
Yeah, the question was formal complaints.
Right, so formal complaints, I believe it was less than 10 last year. And formal to us is a matter that has been referred from another agency. For example, a matter that the Office of the Inspector General has referred over to us, and they determined that a violation occurred. So that could be considered a formal matter. And then another formal matter would be a sworn complaint. Most of our complaints are not sworn. People just submit them, and sworn meaning notarized.
And we have another question from Lucas from Andre Guerrero. Says, I think the venue offered by the BOE is well structured and fair. Though I am not an attorney, my only worry is how do you pick the witnesses? In general, I think your question is how do we select our witnesses while we're conducting our investigations? Is that correct, Andre? Okay, well, let me go on with that one just to address, hopefully this is where Andre was going with that question. We select our interviews in a few different, our witnesses in a few different ways. Sometimes the witness comes directly from a complainant who may identify, in addition to me, Mr. and Miss So-and-so also was there when this happened, and I think they would be a good witness. So we would contact that individual to seek out more direct information about the circumstances. Sometimes the witness could be a fellow employee that's not necessarily named. If it's a matter of something taking place within the workplace, your cube mate right next to you, and right next to the individual might be in a situation to speak to what happens if the violation took place in the workplace. We also can speak with family members. If we're dealing with a case dealing with contracts, we would talk to the individuals who were party to the contract to get the details about the contract to make sure that the parties that involved were involved in the manner they should be. So the violation in the case itself will kind of dictate who is going to be the best witnesses for us to look into and ask questions throughout the investigation. Anybody else any input on that one that you might have, guys?
Did you want to say something, Ron? So, okay, so this also gets discussed a lot when you're planning the investigation. This is why we also have to learn, people's jobs and roles within the agency, because that also can help you determine who is a good individual to interview. So when we're planning the investigation, we usually go down the list of people that might know more about what occurred. And that is usually going to start with determining, the roles in the agency that might have more knowledge of what happened, or who might have been involved in a specific project. And so it's all gets discussed throughout the planning process. And we try to limit the amount of witnesses that we interview because we try to protect the integrity of the investigation as much as we can. So limiting the witnesses and making sure that we're interviewing the right people is very important to us so that it doesn't get out and then it involves more people than it should.
And we have another question in the box from Glenn Dubin. Glenn asks, do we work or refer cases to OCP regarding contractors? You guys want to fill that?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. Glenn asked, do we work or refer to OCP regarding contractors?
To my knowledge, we don't have, okay, so if I'm answering the question correctly, our jurisdiction only covers DC government employees. If the question is if we receive a complaint about contractors outside of DC government, do we refer those complaints to OCP? No, we wouldn't. We probably would close it out. But if we receive a complaint regarding DC government employees that we thought had some OCP traction where it was dealing with contracts, we would definitely contact OCP and try to work with them to get as much information as we could to try to settle that case. But regarding contractors, we do not have jurisdiction over contractors. So in that case, if we receive that, we will probably close it rather than referring it. But again, if it was regarding DC government employees with possible contract infractions, then definitely, yes, we would contact and try to work with OCP, let me fill in and try to figure out exactly what was. I hope that answers the question.
And also, if we dismiss a matter on our end, if it does not fall within our purview, then we will let you know in the dismissal letter that we dismissed this complaint due to this. You should try contacting this person. So we usually give information as to why we're dismissing a matter.
And just one way we may work with OCP is if our investigation may involve a conflict of interest involving contracts that are working with DC government, if the people involved are potentially involved in a conflict of some sort. For instance, an employee within the government, they own an outside company that's trying to contract with the government, and there's a potential conflict of interest. We will seek assistance from OCP in getting the details, understanding the nature of the contract, so that we can find out the specifics to find out if there's a potential violation. I don't see any more questions in there. I just wanted to make sure that you have an opportunity to field any more questions on your mind before we bring this to a close. So please chime in if you have any questions.
And just keep in mind that if you ever have any questions, BEGA@dc.gov is constantly being checked for any complaints or questions. Any legal questions get referred over to the attorney advisors. Investigators are not allowed or cannot answer any legal questions. So if it takes a couple of days to hear back because you submitted a question, just know that more than likely it has been assigned to an attorney who is reviewing it, and we'll get back to you soon. And again, I want to file a complaint since the pandemic has definitely changed the way that we all operate, our office. First, try calling the main line, which is 202-481-3411, and the person answering the phone will usually refer the calls to one of the investigators.
All right, I don't see any more questions in the chat or Q&A at this time.
Other question?
Nope, no more questions, right? No. I don't have any on my end. Thank you so much, everyone, for attending.
All right. Thank you very much.
Jennifer said, thank you for your time. Great presentation. Will we get a copy of the slideshow? Possibly, we'll discuss this with the director.
We can have an email direct and I'll get the.
Okay, yep, you can send it out. And any questions that you all might have for, regarding investigations, like I said, always BEGA@dc.gov. We're constantly monitoring that mailbox. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. We appreciate it.
Thank you. I appreciate it.